everyone, and welcome back to the DS Show. I'm joined by a very special friend today out of the UK. He is a senior biotech finance executive with several years of experience in the FP&A space. Please welcome my good friend, Ben Ashwell-Fryer.
Thanks, Nish. Great to be on. And really keen to share my experience from what is the customer side of Anaplan with your audience today. I guess first of all, just a bit of background about myself. So I'm Ben Ashwell-Fryer. I've worked across a number of finance roles and sectors for 18 years, but really over the last 10 years, I've been really deep in some interesting high growth biotech companies, right from sort of seed stage through to US listed companies, and also from kind of early stage research development through to clinical stage companies. And so it's been a fascinating journey. These are companies particularly that are at the sort of the blend of sort of technology and AI with the drug development process. And so really with the aim of pushing drugs to patients, better quality drugs to patients in a much quicker time frame than is sort of typical in the industry. So I'm really excited about those missions and getting behind those missions. And as you say, I've worked across roles such as FP&A manager, head of FP&A, VP finance, CFO. So a wide range of experience, but really my kind of core areas of interest, if you like, around more the forward-looking, the financial planning strategy, as well as how finance operates. So the systems that we use and the processes that we use to make it as efficient as possible to deliver value to the business. So I've been involved in multiple system implementations over the years, Anaplan being one, but also other accounting and FP&A and procurement tools as well. So I think I've got good insight for your potential audience on how the customer side to these processes as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Just out of my own curiosity, you mentioned kind of your experience in the biotech space. What other industries have you gotten a chance to work in before your biotech journey?
So mainly, IT consulting was one, and aerospace engineering. And then I touched on the food industry a little bit, some not-for-profit, whilst I was in the audit and the practice side of things as well. My leap into biotech was a sort of fortunate event actually, through an old friend, and can't never look back through after that. Really exciting journey to be on.
Are you able to share that story, how you first kind of got into biotech?
Yeah, sure. So it was a friend essentially had made the move into a biotech company that had sort of two interrelated businesses, sort of from a similar platform, but were taking it two different directions. And they had started out as, having a lot of shared services, be it HR, finance, etc. And they were both having relative, success and both growing up and maturing as companies. And so my friend, who very sadly is no longer with us actually, he was doing a fantastic job as kind of financial controller across both businesses, covering a whole gamut of things. And when that got sort of too much, decided to go down one of those businesses, and this role opened up with the other side. And it was very much a dive into my first task was to implement a new ERP system actually. So it was a really great way to get in and get to know people around the business, learn the biotech industry as well, and apply that to implementing this new system.
Yeah, it's a very, very touching and personal story for you, I can imagine. I'm sorry to hear your friend is no longer with us, but in terms of, a couple of thoughts just came to mind based on your response there. Like the first is, my personal observation as someone who's kind of recently dove into this space, it sort of feels like biotech and pharma is a bit of a tight-knit sort of community where, if you're in, but it's very hard to kind of break through. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? And do you kind of share a similar observation?
It's a really interesting point actually. So I that every industry has its own language, right? Its own set of acronyms and things that makes it very scary to people outside of it. And certainly given the sort of deep technical nature of biotech, is certainly up there. And I think once you're in it and it, like you say, people are like the familiarity, and they like to be able to talk their language, but the people that understand it. I think specifically from a finance perspective, it's also quite unique in that, it's maybe a slightly bold statement, but a lot of the financial metrics that you often will measure against in lots of, whether it be, I don't know, SaaS or revenue generating businesses generally, whether it be, software manufacturing, whatever, are sort of meaningless. If you're a pre-revenue biotech, you don't really give a monkey's about gross margin, or, you're frankly not making any profit, right? And so it's all about how you build the most valuable drug portfolio fundamentally. And so the way that you measure that and review that from a finance perspective is quite different to a lot of other industries. Yeah, so I think it's definitely true.
Nice. And we'll kind of dive into some of the differences that make biotech a little bit unique a bit later on. But one of the things you mentioned was your kind of career evolution from sort of that analyst to manager to SVP, CFO. Can you talk a little bit about what each of those roles taught you, or maybe more generally, like what are some of the, I guess, mind shifts or kind of differences that each of those roles kind of brings as one may evolve through their career journey?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the biggest shift, particularly, so I guess specifically in my roles and how mine have evolved is often, I've joined a company at a relatively early stage, and either I've been literally the second person in finance, or joining a small finance team and then sort of watching it grow as the company grows, and building out people and adding people below. So the along that journey, particularly when you're in this position, you pick up a lot of, I guess, tacit knowledge about the company and how things work, and why things are the way they are. And so you can and you are a bit of sort of font of knowledge, which is a great position to be in. And it's definitely enjoyable to help new people get on board as they come into the business and the industry. But I think the big mindset shift is how you really, as you become certainly at those upper levels, is pivoting to really serve the senior execs, the board around you, and really focusing on, I guess, looking outside of your area, right? Looking outside of finance, and ultimately asking the question is, what can I do better to serve those other individuals and help them push the business forward as well. So it's far more, I suppose to take the sort of software term, I guess it's far more user experience focused, I would say, as things move on, rather than sort of how do I go about doing this thing over here, if that makes sense.
And would you say like your role as like a CFO then is mainly to help the company, you're providing metrics, KPIs, insights that can help drive decision making?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, a lot of particularly early stage, it does, with a certain amount of critical mass in biotech, more of these metrics and sort of things become relevant. But at the end of the day, early stage and the lifeblood of any business, but particularly biotech that is burning cash, is ultimately generating value to be able to then go to your next fundraising round and raise more money to the next stage. And so really the focus is what's going on in the business, what's driving any changes to our future planning, future strategy, to be able to inform ultimately when do we run out of money, what are the milestones that are going to occur along that way that are going to enable us to go and raise more money, preferably at a obviously higher valuation as we go through, and to keep moving forward to the next milestone. So it's certainly a key part of any senior finance CFO role is in these businesses is keeping that view of the world up to date, and keeping the board and other management abreast of what that situation is, and making sure that our broader corporate goals are really aligned to making sure that those key milestones that are going to drive those valuation points in future are going to be hit, and we can manage any risks around that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that makes this industry unique is just the high failure rate of projects, I suppose, right? Where, and I don't know if I'm wrong on this, but my assumption is that 99% of drugs and projects generally don't succeed, as they intend to, maybe. That might be a bit of a higher number, 95% maybe, I'm not sure, but but generally speaking, with such a high failure rate, in these projects, and you mentioned the importance of managing cash. What at like the early onset, right, when you're kind of exploring which products to pursue, with the different trials and whatnot, what is kind of the mindset when you're at the launch stage of a company, and how does from a finance perspective, what are some of the things you're trying to do in terms of managing your cash? Like, is it mainly like, are you trying to place bets? Is it calculated risk? Like, what is kind of the mindset and mentality from a cash perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. Also, one with a potentially very broad answer, so I'll try and keep it focused. So partly the answer to that depends on what sort of biotech you are. You might be I guess what we would consider a very sort of more traditional biotech with, a one or two program portfolio in the short term. And so where you're investing that cash and the plans around it are very clear, at least in terms of quantifying and identifying what they are, because that's your those 1, 2, 3, 5 programs, your lifeblood in terms of how you push forward and raise potential cash in future. And so, how do you really every pound that you can, every dollar goes into the progression of those programs as far as is possible. In particularly, I guess in some of the companies I've worked with, the kind of the platform, the technology potential has been slightly different, and therefore the opportunity has been slightly different. In that, with the application of AI, there is that potential that you can use those methodologies to really get sort of a high or higher volume of programs pushing through in a kind of as well sort of therapy agnostic way, a disease agnostic way. And so your field of opportunity is much wider. That on top of, you've got not insignificant investment required in the actual technology platform itself. And so with everything is AI related right now and will continue to be, right, it's a bit of an arms race and a real push to accelerate and progress your technology against the competition. And so the sort of the tricky balance there is, we've got to have the best platform, we've got to progress, that's how we get more projects, but also you've got to balance that with, we've still got to invest money and progress our drug programs, because ultimately that's where the value is and where the proof of the technology is. And so it's this tricky almost battle between the two in terms of balancing the cash invested in those two sort of areas to really maximize value.
That's very fascinating. And then when it comes to just the role of the finance org, one of the things you mentioned early on was, your role in the ERPs and, planning tools. And you've been on the customer side of Anaplan. So how have you found Anaplan to sort of support the function of a finance org, particularly when it comes to the biotech space and the cash planning that you have to kind of undertake, and kind of managing these different ongoing projects at the same time? Just can you talk a little bit about what it's like being on the customer side of Anaplan in this industry?
Sure. So, to be perfectly honest, we had quite a tough journey with, I guess, how we sort of began taking on the system and implementing the system. And a lot of that was what I would definitely say to anyone, taking on, any system, frankly, is don't sort of, bite too much off initially, really focus in on some key parts of your process, and don't be scared as well to really work those processes kind of outside of a system. It doesn't matter if it's kind of really manual and clunky. Make sure you've got a really clear understanding, what are your inputs, what are your processes, what are your outputs at the end, before you try and sort of bake that into a system, even one as kind of flexible and as adaptive as Anaplan. You building these things and changing things on the fly is not a recipe for success so much. So we I think we bit off a bit more than chew. We perhaps didn't have the kind of reality slap from our implementation partner as much as we should, in terms of really focusing in on. And so I can't remember what point of the implementation, but we had many kind of these user stories built up, but in terms of stepping back in the bigger vision and okay, what's that end product, I think it always became a little bit too big to visualize. And so the build process took longer than planned, often. It's probably not unsurprising to hear. I think a lot of people experience that, but it's it was a difficult journey initially. And I think going back to implementation part, I think what changed for us was really getting somebody in that was, first of all had, business exposure and good knowledge, and obviously good plan knowledge, but more importantly, I would say, is that sort of just a bit of, being able to translate from the business to what do you mean in Anaplan, rather than, I don't want to sort of paint everyone with the same brush, but I think a lot of maybe the bigger consultancy, there's so you get sort of pushed maybe to the junior modeler who kind of knows how to build a thing but doesn't maybe have that knowledge, that business knowledge, to take what you're saying and translate it. So yeah, it's a tough journey. I think you have to really kind of prepare and have a reality check on what that sort of change and transition means. But at the end of the day, and kind of why going, it's like jumping around to why we chose Anaplan. I think a lot of people in finance and maybe broader business would always basically they just want Excel, right? that's kind of the reality, but they don't want all the downsides. And the beauty and why ultimately I think something like Anaplan is really beneficial, particularly in spaces like biotech or any kind of particularly high growth or changing environment, is that flexibility in the system, and it's that sort of blank sheet of paper that you can build up in the same way that you could do in Excel, but now you can really take it and design a model and push it out to a part of a business and make and create value for them as part of that, but also gather data part of a broader I guess connected planning process. And so that's the real power, and that's where the real benefit. But I think going back to how you kind of get there, it's focusing in on some small cases to begin with, and I think really thinking about how you can add value to that end user and gather some critical data as part of their use of that model and how they're using it. And I think that's how as well you can build up real to kind of make Anaplan or similar systems very sort of, it's a finance system, right? This is what we use and it's our benefit, or whatever department is kind of launching Anaplan, but it has so many potentials and use cases, but you've got to ultimately make that experience about, okay, I'm building it for the development team or the HR team, right? What's going to add value to them? Oh, by the way, what data can I gather off the back of what they're doing? And whilst they're getting great value out of it, I can inform my medium to long range plans as well. So win-win for everybody.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. So many lessons I think to pull from what you had just mentioned there when it comes to just your story and then the implementation journey. I think one of the things you mentioned that really hit home is just the nature of having the right partner. It's kind of been tale, I think, of not just Anaplan, but several other technologies, right? Where the technology might have the functionality, capabilities you might need, but sometimes it's really the implementation partner that can make or break your implementation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sure. I mean, some of the perhaps bigger corporate systems are more rigid in nature, but a lot of the technologies coming out, Anaplan included, like you say, have a huge amount of flexibility. So there's not often much you kind of can't achieve with these systems, but it's really having a partner who can understand your language, reel off a certain requirement. They can really, first of all, perhaps not just take it literally as read, but have a bit of nous to go, okay, I hear what you're saying, but what about this? Or maybe let's pull it back here. But also to be able to take that process or business explanation and translate it into, okay, I can sort of visualize that model that they're looking for and how we can make that really great user experience. I mean, things that we had to go through, and some of the sort of very base level explanation, even kind of basic accounting, I think we had to go through. I think it just really bogs down your project and your time. It's a critical thing as well. I think particularly right with talking about biotechs or high growth companies at early stage, there's the kind of the what these companies the likes of Anaplan, etc. I think will ideally say you would have from a resource perspective and how you would deliver this. Obviously you've got your implementation partner, but you've also got your own internal resource. Day-to-day reality is very different, and your ability to really allocate resource or can be very unpredictable, depending on what's going on inside the business. So having a partner there that you can comfortably, they can sort of fill in some of the gaps as they need to, just require less sort of hand holding, I think, through the process, is definitely helpful. And also sort of being able to predict basically the pitfalls and mistakes you're going to make if you kind of continue down a track, I think is really important, particularly in companies where whether if it's the finance team putting it in, they're not going to be excess on resource from from a people perspective to be able to deliver these projects.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this with prior guests on this show, but just from a technical standpoint, I think it's a common trap to lose sight of the forest for the trees, right? They say, right? You kind of lose the big picture. You get caught up in, especially in the technical side, right, where you get too caught up in like building specific functionality, getting too technical, trying to build or over engineer certain things. And sometimes what's really more important is what does the customer want? What's the big picture? What are kind of our overarching goals? What is the business trying to do? That mentality shift can be sort of one where I've seen like some of the best, even in the Anaplan space, some of the best master Anaplanners, right? But sometimes to fall in love too much a little bit with the engineering kind of side of it, right? Whereas, I've seen on the flip side, I've seen resources that don't know a lick of model building, let's say, but lead some of the most successful Anaplan projects because they have just that functional finance knowledge or just ability to see the big picture, and they're purely focused on what the customer wants.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'm guilty of it over the year. I would like to rank my Excel knowledge and ability fairly highly and take pleasure in geeking out on building these spreadsheets, right? Or whatever it is,
Sure.
engineering. And so it's easy to slip into and forget actually what does my end user want? What does my customer want? And does this actually deliver that? Frankly, do they care how it was built and what formulas I use? Not really. It's you're definitely right. And I think, always referring back to, what was the question or the 5 questions that our customer wanted to answer or be able to do. And just almost, if I don't know, let's say with a fictional implementation room, having those stuck to the wall and having those as a constant reminder, right? So it really focuses the mind.
Yeah, and I'll say for me personally too, like on my career journey, it's been something where like I kind of started off as a consultant on the implementation side, kind of upskilled into a master Anaplanner. But now that kind of on this entrepreneurial side, working with clients and delivering solutions, I've kind of almost had to unlearn everything like from the engineering side, where I'm like, because I kind of found myself, I fell in love with the technical side, and then slowly I've kind of found myself unlearning and taking several steps back, and I've kind of found myself in a place where it's like, okay, can I build the greatest model? Like, sure, but really it's just being laser focused on what the customer wants.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bit, it kind of slightly going back to your question about, evolution of, I guess, my career through finance. And, ultimately, I guess is what's true of probably almost anything as you operate with more and more kind of senior and influential people, which is, the how and the build is just not top of mind. It's the challenge is you've got to remain an expert, right? You still know your craft and still know, you still got to know the technical and engineering capabilities of Anaplan. You communicate that and how you put that across and package that in a way that really speaks to what they're looking for.
Yeah, now kind of being in your shoes, someone who's gone through this journey of, implementing technologies from a finance side, what are some of the pitfalls you would advise to any other customer that's about to embark on this journey? Like, what are some pitfalls you would advise them to sort of watch out for? Any pitfalls to avoid? Lessons learned that you kind of want to share? We talked about one being the implementation partner, of course, but what are some other things that come to mind?
I guess we touched on the resourcing a little bit as well. I think it's a real challenging one. I think if you're in the luxury to be able to put somebody in your team full time on these projects, then you should absolutely do it. If you can't, you should do your absolute utmost to free that resource, really find where, redistribute work, whatever. I think that's just having that internal focus. And I think having also an internal sort of champion and somebody that's building the knowledge in the system is it's not just critical for the implementation. If anything, it's more important for the post implementation, right? When you're kind of flying solo, because if you don't have that, you can't where you just can't realistically break away from the implementation partner, or you're basically kind of stuck with what you've got and you hope and pray. So I think that's key. And I think communication, it's like I think certainly myself, and I think lots of people in kind of finance silos maybe are guilty of seeing systems implementations as exactly that, a systems implementation. And actually there's a much broader, there's a whole exercise in change management, really, if you truly want the sort of the potential that these systems can deliver. If you're talking about the end vision of Anaplan, right, it's having all your different parts of the business interacting with your planning model and getting value out of it, and ultimately driving your planning process. And so you've got to treat it like it's an organizational change, and so you've got to, I think, really over communicate and keep people involved in that process. And even if a particular team or a function that are a year, 18 months down your roadmap in terms of how bringing them online, keep that visibility of the project, and keep showing progress and successes along the way. Because I think the worst thing you can do, I think, is basically go, right, we're doing this Anaplan implementation, disappear into a back room for a year plus. When's this coming? And I think it's not to say disappearing and ultimately building and delivering it won't get you there, but it's gonna be received a whole lot better if you've really involved stakeholders along the way. So I think that is probably something. Again, it's a resource drain, right? And when your head's completely in the implementation and trying to build out, it's a sort of thing over here that gets slightly ignored. But I think it's a critical thing. And if there's people in your business that are either in sort of communications, or maybe some people in HR that can sort of help with employee engagement, it's a good way of sort of utilizing those sort of skill sets and helping them helping you use them to help you to develop the communication strategy. So another neat way of bringing people into the project, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to unpack there too, because just in my experience, I've seen certain companies or clients where they have perhaps senior exec level buy-in to Anaplan or whatever system that they're trying to implement. But then, let's say they want to involve 4 teams like HR, sales, marketing, finance, right? But like maybe let's say one of those 4 teams is super invested and the other 3 are kind of just like, okay, we don't really want this, but you're kind of forcing this on us, right? And and I think that kind of speaks a little bit to company culture and and sometimes the politics or office politics that kind of get involved. And I've seen other times where the different functions are super excited to collaborate and kind of be along the journey. How important would you say is just that company culture as kind of like a foundation of just going through an implementation like this?
I think it's I mean, it a lot smoother, right? I think, like you say, if you've got teams and you've got a general culture of collaborativeness, then you're already sort of halfway there. People feel like it's being forced on them, not going to be engaged in it. It sort of goes to the sort of bare minimum, basically. Okay, you need something. Like, what do I need to do to basically get you to go away? I will do that and no more. And actually, it's funny. It slightly reminds me. I was in a room with a very well-meaning individual. It wasn't said with any malice or anything, but the question was like, what do finance need? Not a bad question as such, but it really just irritated me, because I was like, well, I know I'm in finance and I probably shouldn't say this, but it's not really about what I need. It's sort of more about, okay, what would benefit you in what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve? I can, I can get the information I need almost as a sort of byproduct of that. Slight generalization, but yeah, I think that's it's leading with how do you really benefit those teams. And so wouldn't it be great to have a culture where everyone's like, yeah, let's get on. That's it's never going to have that across the board. So I think you have to work with those individuals that maybe aren't seeing the benefit. And going back to the how do you deliver you've got to dig in and understand what are their pain points, and can we pick 1 or 2 of those and build something that shows how that could be solved, win them round through action, and bringing them along the journey in that way.
Yeah, I kind of want to maybe kind of go back in the circle, I guess, a little bit, where we're kind of talking a little bit about the implementation side, but now as a buyer, right, and kind of looking at someone who's evaluating which planning tool to go with. What would you say is some of the criteria that, I'm not sure if you want to speak to about yourself, what you were looking for when on kind of the buyer side when evaluating these tools, and just kind of what goes into a decision like that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, best to sort of speak to my own experience. I mean, I think certain industries obviously will have quite different requirements and may actually be best served by systems that are quite sort of rigid and structured in nature because they're in more predictable environments, or the kind of the things I need to plan and measure are predictable in nature. But yeah, certainly in the spaces that I've worked, it's you need the flexibility and the agility in a system. Kind of just to repeat what I said earlier, there's a sort of reason why Excel is so prolific and successful, right? I mean, being able to really bespoke something, I think, and change that as it needs to over time as companies mature or the environment changes, I think is critical. But you need the robustness around that, which Excel, not so much Excel itself, but the users of Excel maybe don't build in the best robustness at times, right? So you need that structure and that reliability in it as well. And I think I don't know how maybe this is more unique to me, but I think certainly I'm quite a visual person, so I like to sort of see. I do a thing over here, and I see an impact over there, and some of the maybe sort of more big corporate orientated systems is sort of almost you just got a series of boxes to enter numbers into, and you're not really like seeing the bigger picture. And so I think a system that really lets you blend in a way that Anaplan does, you see a visual chart alongside maybe some, a lever you're pulling in the plan, and you can see what the impact is that kind of live. So I think, that they're critical things. And then I think it's about, assuming you're a company on a growth trajectory, it's really, can this system change and adapt as we grow, but, can it cope with all that's maybe 3 times as big in, a few years' time, or adding lots of different users, having different users in the system, can we go into this knowing that we're on a several-year journey and that system's still going to be good for us at the end of that period and for the future.
I think you mentioned and touched on a lot of the different areas where I think Anaplan historically is kind of thrived, which is like that real-time updates, and especially lately with some of the product improvements they've come out with on the UX side. I know some of the competitors were kind of catching up there for a minute, like kind of if we were to go back a couple of years ago, but especially of late, I feel like Anaplan's really hit the accelerator again on some of their roadmap, and it's nice to see some of the, like the UX side and kind of them focusing more on what the customer needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live in a I guess society's become quite impatient, right? We live in a world where everything's at the sort of tip of our fingers and immediately available, and we get frustrated when a web page takes more than 5 seconds to load. So it's really critical, I think, that is reflected in the systems. People want those quick answers. They don't want to have to go onto a page here and go over there and press a button and refresh and wait for something to sync up or whatever it might be to get an answer. They want it there and then, right in front of them.
Well, as we kind of wrap things up here, I guess one of my last questions I generally like to ask folks is, if you were to imagine somebody starting out their career right now today and entering into the field that you've had the privilege of working in throughout your career in biotech, what would be advice you would give a general finance professional looking to enter the biotech space today?
So I think the key thing is getting your head around, and there's lots of great material on this out there, right? Which is freely available. But get your head around the drug development process. It's an inherently deeply technical area. It's also largely intangible in nature, right? There isn't really a thing you can touch and feel. It's it's not a part in a factory you can go and see being made as such. So I think really getting your head around the concepts of what are the processes that the business are going through to go from A to B. Get into a lab if you can. Really interesting to see what people do in the lab and the various things they use, and it kind of brings it alive. So I think that would be my first advice. I think second would be probably throw away a lot of the assumptions around what you think people care about from a finance perspective, depending quite where you come from. Really focusing on cash. Frankly, nobody really cares about your accruals or your amortized prepayments or what to an extent what your P&L's doing. It's absolutely focusing and laser focus on cash, and really understanding how cash flow relates to the milestone deliveries of the business. all different sort of risk factors and levers that go with that, and dust up your abilities in discounted cash flows and risk adjusted net present values if you've not done that for a while. Yeah, all those sort of valuation techniques again, really critical in the space. Yeah, so I think that being top three. But yeah, to soak it up, it's I think like working in any high tech kind of business that's sort of on the forefront of new technology. I think it's really fascinating places to be.
All right, awesome. Well, as we wrap up here, is there any last words that you would like to leave the audience with before we close?
No, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I think well, hopefully your audience has got some value out of our conversation today. I've enjoyed the conversation, so thank you, Daanish.
Likewise.
Yeah, no, I think that's
Yeah, likewise, and appreciate you coming on the show. And of course, we'll look to perhaps do this again sometime. And of course, appreciate all your contributions to our team so far.
No, you're welcome. And yeah, great to be a part of it. Thanks, Daanish.
All right, cheers.
Cheers. Take care.